Hey guys, this is Ethan with Ready Life. I just wanted to walk through the M.A.R.C.H acronym with you guys as you prepare for your level 1 readiness training for first aid. And so M.A.R.C.H is the acronym we really love to use in Ready Life because it's a really simple acronym that walks through and addresses the traumatic things that could happen to a person, to a patient, or even to yourself that would cause the loss of life first. And so we like to say you march to those who are in need of your help, and as an easy way to remember the M.A.R.C.H acronym. So in starting it off, we have the M in M.A.R.C.H, and that goes to massive bleeding. And so the reason that's the first one on the list is because a massive loss of blood can be the fastest killer. You lose up to 40% of your blood. Anything after that, your patient or yourself, you're probably not going to make it. So being able to stop the bleed is one of the most important parts in trauma first aid care. And just a word on the difference between normal first aid care and trauma first aid care. Normal first aid care could be for bumps, for bruises, for, owies, for things that, splinters, things you're hurt. First aid care for trauma is going to be something that could potentially take your patient or your life away within minutes. And so being able to know and identify, going down your list of M.A.R.C.H is going to help you to address what could take that patient's life first. And so, like I said, the massive bleeding, that's going to be one of the quickest ones. So being able to identify where your patient is bleeding and to be able to stop that bleed as quickly as possible. So say it's on a limb and it's a profuse bleeding, being able to get that tourniquet high above where that bleed is happening, closer to the body. So say I had a cut on the arm right here, bleeding profusely, bringing that tourniquet up my arm, shutting off that valve so the blood discontinues flowing, packing that wound with gauze, and then wrapping that with a bandage would be your standard way of dealing with a massive bleed like that. And on the body, where obviously you can't get a giant tourniquet around the body and you wouldn't want to shut down any vital organs, going and packing and bandaging that wound is going to be most of the time how you'll address massive bleeding. And you'll be able to tell massive bleeding from non-life-threatening bleeding generally by the amount of blood. Like say I had a cut, like I said, on my arm right there. If it's bleeding, and every time you see my heart bleed, my heart pump, boom, 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 massive amounts of blood are coming off, that's what you want to address right away, because that's what could kill me very shortly. And so next down the list, so that's our massive bleeding, is airway. So of course the next thing that could end up killing you is having lack of oxygen to your head, to your rest of your body. And so generally in a trauma situation, the things that are going to stop you from being able to get that proper breath is going to be either vomit or blood or something else that's lodged in your throat, or just in a common situation, you're sitting at the dinner table and someone got way too hungry, so they're scarfing down their food and they got a big old piece of something in their throat, and you need to get behind them and give them the Heimlich maneuver. And so that's going to be your other major one that'll kill quickly. And then respiratory. And so a lot of the time with respiratory going and that person not being able to breathe properly, say someone just began to drown or they were in shock and they're having trouble breathing. What's amazing about the human body and the things we figured out is for a trauma situation, for a time, you can be someone's lungs. And like we'll talk about next, you could be someone's heart for them. And so say that person, you just pulled them out of the water from drowning and they're not breathing at all, being able to give them those rescue breaths, those deep breaths, breath in, be able to fill those lungs back up with oxygen, and naturally they'll deflate again, and within 30 seconds being able to give them those breaths again. And a lot of the time, addressing the respiratory and circulation is going to be within CPR. So you'll have your rescue breaths that you do within CPR, and then your chest compressions you'll do if someone's heart's not pumping. But every once in a while there's going to be a situation where their heart's pumping, but they're just not breathing. Or where their heart's pumping, or their heart's not pumping, but they are breathing. Kind of odd, but it can happen. And so, like I said, respiratory, it's going to basically be breathing for that person. And airway is important to have first because, you could go and try to breathe for that person, but if there's something lodged in their airway, it's not going to help at all. You need to get that out first. And so next we move to circulation. And so most of your circulation issues are going to be someone's heart stopped, they had a heart attack, or they're going into shock, and basically being that person's heart to pump for them. And so something in Ready Life we train a lot is how to do chest compressions. And it's awesome. We even recently got to get some CPR dummies too, so that way you can make sure you have the proper amount of pressure and the right timing on your chest compressions. And so that's going to be your circulation there. And like one of the reasons M.A.R.C.H is so important too is because sometimes you could be trained all over with these things and come up to someone whose heart's not pumping, and you could begin doing chest compressions to get their blood pumping. But if you didn't check that person first, they could actually be massively bleeding. And so, like, I heard a story of a police officer once who had fallen down. He had been shot, and some of his other police officers got there and they saw his heart wasn't beating, so they began doing chest compressions for him. But come to find out, they flipped him over a minute later and they had pumped all of his blood out of him because he had been shot through the back. And so, like, really sad. So that's why it's important to check from top to bottom: massive bleeding, airway, respiratory, circulation. And then the last one, and this can generally happen a lot in any traumatic situation medically that you'll go through, but hypothermia, which is when you're getting really cold. So anytime you have massive loss of blood, your body's ability to regulate its own heat goes down and down and down. And so being able to get someone warm who's just suffered trauma, or it could be someone who was just exposed to the cold for too long and their body's beginning to suffer either mild or major hypothermia, severe hypothermia, and being able to follow through and get wet clothing off that person, begin to warm them and wait, is really important. And then also underneath the H category is hyperthermia. So if you think about it, hyper, like a hyper little kid, hyperthermia is when your body is too hot and it can't regulate the heat properly. So common situation, hyperthermia, would be someone's either out in the heat too long, or someone's potentially having an allergic reaction, say to a food or a bee sting. So it's that ability to get that person's body temperature cooled down before a potential of a heat stroke could set in, to where that person's body just can't regulate the heat anymore. So that's pretty much the entirety of the M.A.R.C.H acronym. And as you do your level 1 in your readiness trauma training like this is kind of an overview, because each one of these situations could have more and more in-depth aspects to it. But for being part of Ready Life, these are the majority of situations you're going to come into that are going to be life-threatening, that you want to address. And in our next video, we're going to take apart one of the trauma first aid kits that we build for members, and that they can keep with them in their vehicles or in their homes or on their person at all times. Awesome. Thanks, guys.